You describe Boris's conflicted attitude towards migration. I have a very conflicted attitude towards Boris.
He's a better man than many of his detractors would admit, but he clearly has flaws.
When he's required to be serious, and he can be, there are other moments when he's fundamentally unserious about the problems that we face. So I'm torn.
Fundamentally, the thing that was lacking was a lack of decisiveness on some key issues.
You talked about the extent to which events after 2019 did not live up to the hopes of that manifesto. One of the things that I want to go on to is the extent to which reform and also the Conservatives under Kemi Badenoch are seeking to learn the lessons of what went wrong post-2019. What do you think went wrong?
Well, I mean, obviously, it was a pandemic, so
Yes.
that really made it very difficult to deliver lots of things that we wanted to. The Boris wave is the most obvious,
Yes.
failed policy beyond failure.
The sudden huge spike in migration
Huge
just
spike in
towards the end of the
migration.
pandemic.
Yeah, which actually the really large increases happened, I think, after I'd left, but the policies had been implemented earlier, in sort of 2021. So the things like the graduate visa came in a bit earlier. I think the main failure was the Home Office and the ONS were not counting properly the number of people who were coming in. So you have to remember, during 2020, nobody was coming into the country because of lockdown.
Yeah.
And then in 2021, the big fear was that the economy was reopening and there would not be enough people to do the jobs, and therefore some migration should be coming in. There was a kind of loosening of the system, social care in particular. But generally, we were being told that the numbers were what you would expect once the economy rebounds, once it opens up again. And in fact, the numbers that they gave towards the end of 2021 were then wrong, and they had to be revised upwards about a year later. But we didn't know at that time. And in fact, my experience of that whole period in 2021 was trying to stop small boats, trying to argue against increasing too much. So I don't know if you remember the pigs in blankets crisis of Christmas 2021, which everyone was worried that there wouldn't be enough people working in abattoirs in order to, then have pigs in blankets at Christmas time. And we held firm on opening up lots of new routes for these different jobs because we said
whether it was in food processing or haulage drivers or so on.
Exactly. But, unfortunately, some of the other policy decisions that were being made were allowing lots more people in. I think the big mistake was that once government knew, particularly under the Rishi Sunak regime, once they knew that the numbers had got that big, they should at that point have clamped down quite quickly, and they didn't. They waited too long. Yeah.
To what extent do you think Boris was either incurious about it or let down by the system and others, or actually not perhaps as worried as he might have been, because Boris would have hated to have been thought of as a racist or restrictionist or a latter-day Enoch Powell?
I think he was probably torn between both those positions. I think he understood the importance of trying to keep numbers low. The pressure from business and from employers and the NHS was quite significant in 2021. People were very, very worried that we wouldn't have enough people working in care homes and that businesses were opening up. As it happened, a lot of the visas that were being given out were not for people working in the end. They were dependents. And then later, people coming in through refugee routes as well. So I think those pressures were real. I think possibly on some level, he is of a more liberal disposition and wouldn't want to be seen to be clamping down. I can't speak for him. I think you'd have to ask him that question, what was going through his mind. From my perspective, we were very clear that we absolutely should not have a massive surge in immigration, and that's not what we were planning for. The Home Office, you'd have to ask the Home Secretary at the time what they were doing. I think there are lessons learned about the fact that you need proper data, you need to understand what's going on in the system. And there were definitely failures. I confess, my own failures as well. But it wasn't an intentional policy to have such a high surge in migration numbers. And, I think once the government realised that that's what was happening, they should have clamped down much more quickly. In fact, all the way through 2021, the small boats, the illegal migration problem was a thing that was really, really exercising us. And we were obviously working on things like the Rwanda scheme at the time.
I want to go on to look at reform and the Conservatives, and indeed Civic Future and Fix Britain, and the different ways in which people are grappling with how to make a success of government and to learn appropriate lessons. But just one thing, on Boris himself as an individual, as a personality, you describe Boris's conflicted attitude towards migration. I have a very conflicted attitude towards Boris. On the one hand, I really enjoyed working for him, and I think that there are very few people who have his ability sometimes to cut to the heart of issues and to articulate the heart of certain problems. And he has a deft and agile and curious mind. And a lot of the detractors, I think, are grotesquely unfit him. But on the other hand, he can be infuriatingly evasive and sometimes at the moments, and this I think is all the greater a problem, when he's required to be serious, and he can be, there are other moments when he's fundamentally unserious about the problems that we face or faced. So I'm torn. I think he's obviously a Marmite character. There are some people who suffer from Boris derangement syndrome and who can see no good in him, which I think is completely unfair. There are other people, a smaller group, who think that he was terribly traduced and aren't necessarily willing to acknowledge his faults. Overall, if you were going to pass a judgment at the moment, what sort of judgment would you make?
I'm wise enough not to pass a judgment on a former employer. And all I will say is, and I said this when I resigned as well, as you've just said, I think he's a better man than many of his detractors would admit.
Oh, yes.
But he clearly has flaws.
Mm.
All prime ministers have flaws.
Yep.
Unfortunately, his were very exposed during that period. And, as I said before, the pandemic drove a lot of people mad.
Yes.
And forced a lot of decisions that, maybe in hindsight people will regret. I suppose I'm trying to find a diplomatic way of avoiding saying anything that will be so critical of him. He's not prime minister anymore.
No.
I had a long working relationship with him. I don't see a great advantage to
I think
doing
that's
a
very
character
gracious.
assassination of him. And I don't want to either. I think
you-
that would be unfair. There are plenty of others who have pointed out his flaws and where he went wrong. And I think I'll leave it to others to say.
I'm not going to ask you to endorse my analysis, but as you listened to it, analysis may be putting it too highly, set of impressions, did you think that I was being unfair given my perspective?
No, look, it's for you to decide on how you characterise that period. I mean, I suppose a question for you, if I was to ask, is lots of people will pin the blame on Boris, his personality, for what went wrong in that period. I think always there's, the protagonist, the central protagonist has a lot to answer for.
Yes.
But I think the more systemic problems also need to be explained. And fundamentally, the thing that was lacking, partly because of him, but also because of the Conservative Party and cabinet, was a lack of decisiveness on some key issues. So you will know just from being in government that every time a cabinet minister wants to make a decision, they have to issue a right-round process or consult the rest of cabinet. And usually when there was a delay in the process, it was because one bit of government was blocking another bit of government. Yes. And that argument had not been resolved properly. Sometimes that was because number 10 was not making a decision and not arbitrating properly. But also it was because fundamentally the Conservative Party just couldn't agree.
No,
There was about 2 or 3 different parties in one, and they couldn't agree their position.
I think that is absolutely spot on. So I think that sometimes we expect too much. We expect superhuman virtues of our prime ministers. That doesn't mean they should be exempt from criticism, quite the opposite. But any individual operates within a system. They have the capacity, if they're at the pinnacle of that system, to change it. But that in itself is quite a formidable undertaking. It's the system. I'm not absolving individuals of responsibility, but it's the people within the party, their attitudes. It's the people within government, their habits, that will often determine success or failure. thinking back to the Conservative Party at that time, what do you think were the fundamental problems that it had? And are those problems in any way being resolved now in opposition?
Well, they, to give you an example, the whole issue around trans and self-ID, which I'd assumed coming into number 10 that we would just immediately stop that policy.
Yes.
And not spend very much time on it.
No.
It was a policy that had been developed under Theresa May. And there were quite a few policies in that bucket of basically what I would call identity politics light. It was sort of trying to do things that would make the Tory party look less nasty.
Yes.
And my view was that they were bad policies. They had potentially very bad outcomes, adverse consequences. And number 10, the Prime Minister could lead his party and say, the reason we're not doing this is X, Y, Z. And then, but we are going to do these other really good and important things for the country, and we're going to get the economy growing, and we're going to, sort out our borders, etc. Unfortunately, I had not banked on how much parts of the Conservative Party really liked those policies and really wanted to back them. We had lots of MPs campaigning for self-ID. And therefore, the Prime Minister was trying to keep a coalition of people who had just diametrically opposed views. I mean, people, I won't name them, but quite a lot of MPs were sort of trotting into my office and saying, no, it's very important we do this. This is the most important issue that the Conservative Party could deal with. And I just couldn't believe it. And I thought, seriously, this is not the most important issue. No. It's a tiny, tiny number of people it will affect. I understand that, and lots of MPs have teenage children who are very, motivated by these questions. This is where leadership is so important in politics. You need someone who will stand at the front and say, we're not going to do this, and these are the reasons why, and make a case persuasively to their party and to the country.
Yes.
And I think that was entirely possible to do, but we didn't do it. And there was there were some divisions within number 10.
Yes,
I think it was reported, at the time. And is that being resolved now? Well, Kemi Badenoch is, was at the time, you characterise her a bit of a culture warrior. She had very strong views about all of this stuff. And to what extent is she able to persuade the broader Conservative Party to go along with that change of direction? I don't know. But that, I think, needs to happen. And, we when I was in number 10, we commissioned the CAS review. We also commissioned the Sewell review. We did quite a lot to try and change the narrative around these very
the CAS review particularly into the treatment that was offered to younger people who were potentially undergoing gender identity treatment, and the Sewell review into racial and ethnic disparities, which was intended to look at them through the lens of evidence and data rather than a pre-existing disposition to believe that society was fundamentally unjust and that injustice was driven by racism.
Yeah, and I was involved in both of those things, and I thought that they were very important for changing the way that government, that policymakers, legislation could work. The thing that is harder to change but needs to be changed is things like the Equality Act.
Yes.
In the end, the self-ID policy didn't go ahead.
No.
But things like the Human Rights Act, all of these bits of wiring in the system that have, I think, led to quite adverse consequences need to be looked at again, need to be reviewed. And we weren't able to do that when I was in government. But I do think that's something that hopefully political parties will look at now. Yeah.